Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Infinity Workforce Solutions Fast Forward webinar series, sponsored by Vertical Alliance Group. My name is Steve Kessler, and I'm going to be the host of the program today. We do appreciate you all joining us, and if you don't mind, jump onto that chat box there at the bottom and let us know who you are and where you're from and maybe what company you're with. I see a lot of our customers popping in here too. So while y'all are doing that, let me introduce a couple of folks here. First of all, I want to introduce Mark Ray. Those of you that have been on our webinars in the past, Mark's a regular on our program. He's a 35-year transportation executive veteran that has a lot of experience in pretty much every aspect of trucking. So welcome, Mark. Do you have any comments about our topic today?
No, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of information exchange that needs to take place on this issue. I think the one fact that none of us would argue is that impaired driving is and continues to contribute to problems on our highways for our commercial drivers. So I'm really looking forward to Jeff's presentation. We're not going to answer all the questions today. We might even raise more questions at the end than we have at the beginning. But to solve a problem, you've got to at least agree on what the pieces of the puzzle are. So we're really looking forward to our friend from the ATRI that's done exhaustive research on this topic. And let's go.
All right, everybody, let me introduce our very special guest today. With us this morning is Jeff Short. Jeff's the Vice President of the American Transportation Research Institute based in Atlanta. His areas of expertise include transportation policy and regulations, data management and analysis, and freight-related safety, technology, and performance measurement. Jeff's been with ATRI for 19 years and has worked directly with anonymous telematics data, expanding the scale and scope of the organization's truck GPS data research and analysis. And through this work, he's built systems for measuring travel time, speed, and reliability indices for freight movement across North America. Jeff has published several trucking industry-focused reports on transportation finance and the cost benefits of key funding mechanisms. Additionally, he's led numerous research initiatives assessing the impact of federal regulations, particularly those focused on the driver's hours of service rules. And his other research interests include safety culture within organizations and emerging freight technologies. Jeff holds a bachelor's degree from Emory University and a master's from Georgia Institute of Technology. Good morning, Jeff. Welcome.
Good morning. How's it going?
Going very well. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Not a problem. Not a problem at all. I'm glad to speak with everyone on this topic. It certainly is a difficult, tricky topic. The states, at the end of the day, are putting out their version of what the law is regarding marijuana, and the federal government has its version. And the two aren't lining up. So we'll go through some of the research that we've done in this area. Specifically, I'll be talking about all aspects of marijuana legalization on the trucking industry, in particular, the impacts of recreational marijuana, because we know most states out there, if not all states, have legalized some form of medicinal access to marijuana. In some places, it's more extensive than others, but what is a real concern to the trucking industry at this point is recreational marijuana. So if we can go to the next slide. Just some background on my organization. We are the trucking industry's not-for-profit research organization, American Transportation Research Institute, and we do research in all areas of the trucking industry. This particular topic, of course, falls into safety, and we we do research on just about everything involving trucks, from economic analyses to what is the impact on the environment of, let's say, switching to a battery electric vehicle. We've got a lot of work in that area as well. All of our studies are free to the public. They're at our website, truckingresearch.org. You can browse through there, pick a study if it's of interest, including this study, and just click, fill in something that they ask for, a couple, your email address, I believe, and then you can download the report. And it's very helpful to see who is downloading the reports and that sort of thing. That's why we collect that information. We are a not-for-profit. Our funding comes, about 50% of our funding comes directly from donations, charitable donations to our organization from the trucking industry. And the other part of our research is governments such as state government, federal government. They hire us as a consultant, as an expert in the trucking industry, so we can guide them through difficult research topics that they don't necessarily have the expertise to navigate through. So if we can go to the next slide, just really quickly, as a not-for-profit, we are governed by a board of directors. The board of directors every year reviews our research agenda and approves it. But more importantly, on the next slide, you'll see how we come to research a topic, and that is through our research advisory committee. In this group, it's a diverse group from throughout the industry. This group gets together once a year, and they say, what are the most important topics that need to be researched? What has ATRI researched in the past? What needs to be done in the future? And they pick 5 of the most important topics and push them through, vote for them, and we move forward on that research. So with that, we can go on to the next slide and right into the marijuana topic. So in 2022, this was a top research priority for our research advisory committee. It is not our first time looking at marijuana and the impact of marijuana on the trucking industry. In fact, in 2018, we did research on marijuana that mostly focused on testing. How do we test? But it took a good look at where it was legal and where it wasn't. And it's kind of surprising. That research came out in 2019. It's kind of surprising how much legalized marijuana has grown, so to speak. So I'll show you that in a coming slide. But the focus of this research is workforce implications from increased legalization. We went and looked at the number of positive tests going on out there, how many folks are winding up in the clearinghouse, and for what reasons. Is it marijuana? Is it other drugs? And we also did a survey with trucking industry, with motor carriers. We had about 200 folks respond to that motor carrier survey, mostly from safety departments, HR. And then we had a huge response on our driver survey. We put these similar questions out to drivers, and 3,300 offered responses, and it really great information, really great input on this topic from the drivers, and we'll go through some of that as well. So if we can go to the next slide. So the first thing we looked at in this research was legalization trends. So here are, in the deep green, our 2019 study. Those are the states that were legal. It was 10 states where recreational marijuana was legal. Fast forward to the present day, to 2023, and we've gotten that number up to 23 states. As of June 2023, 23 states have legalized recreational marijuana, and this certainly presents issues to the trucking industry, since drivers are driving through these states, drivers are based in these states, and we'll go through how many folks are actually based in these states. And some folks don't actually know whether or not they can use marijuana, they may think, oh, I can use marijuana because it's legal in my state. And that, of course, is not the case for those governed under FMCSA. I should note also that with this spread of legal marijuana, Americans have become more and more supportive of marijuana legalization. And there's one survey out there that was done where 59% of Americans support both medical and recreational marijuana legalization. Only 10% are against legalization, and the rest fall somewhere in the middle. So it's definitely a majority. There aren't many folks out there who are absolutely against legalization of any kind. It's only 10%. So this is the trend. This is where things are heading. And that map is likely to get more and more green. I can't tell you which states will be next, but certainly there are other states that will be joining the list. So if we go to the next slide, we'll look at some demographic information. So at the time of our 2019 study, only 24% of the US population lived in a state where marijuana was legal, and that is now up to half of the US population. So half of the US population can access, for recreational purposes, marijuana. What does this do with our drivers? In the past, it was only 18%. Drivers apparently, compared to the US population, tend to live in places where marijuana is not legal, but it's still a large number. And then you go to 2023, that dark blue line on the bottom, and you see 41.4% of drivers are currently based in a state where marijuana, recreational marijuana, is legal. So if we can go to the next slide. So the first part of our research into this topic in this most recent report, we looked at marijuana and the impacts on highway safety. And a lot of this required us to go out and see what research was being done in academia, et cetera, so that we could really hone in on what this does for highway safety. So the first item here, we looked at the impacts on drivers. Is there research out there supporting impacts on drivers of using marijuana? If you're driving a car, for instance, and you use marijuana, there are going to be impacts. It's impaired coordination, distorted perception, problem-solving difficulties. Those are just some of the issues. But it's pretty well established that marijuana impairs drivers. There are folks out there who may say, oh, it slows down drivers, that sort of thing. But there is no argument that drivers of anything should be using marijuana. It causes a safety problem. Now, as far as the next item here, impacts on safety statistics, there is a slight, when I say safety statistics, what I'm talking about is the rate of crashes, particularly in states where recreational marijuana has been legal. At the end of the day, not enough data exists out there. It hasn't been legal for long enough for them to, for researchers to take that one variable and say, yes, this has negatively impacted highway safety. But initial data does suggest that marijuana legalization has overall negatively impacted highway safety. In the case in particular, it increases non-fatal crashes and non-fatal and injury crashes. So more research is certainly needed in that area, but that's the overall impact. And then finally, we looked at the status of impairment testing standards. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of challenges in this area to overcome with biological measurements of marijuana and the level of impact marijuana has on a driver. Currently, it's behavior-based, but behavior-based methods for testing, let's say a roadside test, touching your nose, that sort of thing, walk a straight line. The research out there shows that there's a lack of sensitivity towards marijuana impairment. And in one research study, they were identifying people who weren't impaired as impaired through these tests, and vice versa. People who were impaired were passing the test. So what really needs to happen is there needs to be a standard biology-based impairment test, and that just has not been developed. And part of that is, what does it even mean to be impaired? That hasn't even been settled. How much THC in the blood, for instance? What is that measurement going to be, and what does it mean to be impaired? There is no settled science on this yet. What we've done is, not we on this call, but as a country or as states have put the cart before the horse, there's no way to test for this, but access has been increased. And certainly I think an impairment test would be critical. We'll get to that a little later for the trucking industry as legalization increases, as more people have access to marijuana and are not necessarily people who would drive while impaired. So if we can go to the next slide. So we looked at some of the data out there for who is ending up in the clearinghouse, in the drug and alcohol clearinghouse, and particularly the drug side of things. We didn't really look at alcohol, but what are they ending up there for? And then I'll show you some of the statistics for how many folks are going through the process to return to duty. But I found this statistic quite amazing. We have very, very dangerous drugs here: cocaine, methamphetamine, opioids, amphetamine. That, you know, all of this is dangerous to use and drive. But as many of the folks who responded to the survey said, you know, I would never ever hire someone who has a cocaine positive or a meth positive. I wouldn't even consider it. Whereas marijuana, there's more acceptance of that among carriers. So we look here and we see how many of the folks who are testing positive are positive for marijuana, and it's most of them. It's the majority. So what is likely happening here is more folks are using marijuana. It's more easily accessible. It stays in your body a very long time. It stays in your body for, let's say, 30 days or 3 weeks. Whereas something like cocaine, that can be out of your body in a matter of hours, if you will, if not a day or two. So it's really very difficult to catch someone with cocaine, marijuana use, I mean methamphetamine use, because it stays in the body for such a short period of time. But the approach to marijuana is, we're going to test for metabolites, and the metabolite test is not, it's definitely not a test for impairment. It's a test for past use, and that past use is detectable for a very, very long time, 30 days in the case of marijuana, not for these other drugs. So next slide, please. So here are some of the numbers. What's going on with the industry as far as folks getting a positive test, being put in prohibited status, and then entering back into the workforce. And what we see here is, since the drug and alcohol clearinghouse, looking back at numbers from January 2021 through a 3-year time period, what we have is, actually it's before January 2021. I apologize there, but what we have is the number of folks getting violations is going up, and it has gone up to 166,000. That's no surprise. But 91,000 of these, as of 2023, these folks have not started the return to duty process. And the total in prohibited status is 120,000 out of 166,000. That's an enormous number. And when you look back and think, all right, 57% of these folks, it's a marijuana positive test, and they're kind of being pulled out of the industry. Certainly, it puts pressure on the number of available drivers, especially if these drivers are not using marijuana anytime close to being on duty. For instance, maybe on the weekend, or maybe before they even decided to enter the trucking industry, you see a lot of pre-screening positive tests. Folks may not have been aware, because it's legal in their state, they may not have been aware that they would have to take this drug test. Though to all of us, it may seem obvious. It might not be something that is on a new entrant's radar, and then they end up testing positive. So if we go to the next slide, we will get into first we'll go into some of the issues, additional workforce implications. Then we're going to go into the survey data. So to that earlier point, trucking competes with other industries. Let's say short haul, local driving. These do not require a test for drugs. So folks may wind up in the clearinghouse, and let's say they find a driving job, or a job not having anything to do with driving, and that is a way they can possibly continue to use marijuana recreationally outside of the workforce, still have a job. So essentially, what is happening here is folks are being pushed into other industries or other areas of goods movement. So also, we can't overlook the fact that medical marijuana is out there, and there are states that have moved to protect employees' use under state law. What we have in the trucking industry is the current status as a Schedule I drug protects employers from, let's say, being sued under the Americans with Disabilities Act for testing folks for marijuana use, because that would be some form of discrimination as a medical user. There are also states, California in particular, has made it illegal to discriminate against workers who use marijuana recreationally. So you can't say, all right, I know you use marijuana recreationally outside of the workforce. You cannot terminate employment because of that, and therefore you can't test for marijuana. There are currently exceptions. The exception being folks who are federally regulated. That's why it's important that these regulations are in place. That's why the Schedule I drug designation, which means marijuana has no medicinal use in the eyes of the federal government. That's why those items are so important. And we'll go over that on one of the last slides. So moving on to the next slide. So like I said, we did some survey research. We surveyed motor carriers first, and then 3,300 drivers. So the first question here that we'll go through is, based on your company's policies, does a prior positive drug test for marijuana at any time in the past disqualify a driver automatically from employment at your company? And when I started in the industry about almost 20 years ago, I believe this number was much, much higher, but right now what we heard is 43% said they will not hire a driver who has this past marijuana test. I would suspect that that might have been double 20 years ago. And now folks, trucking company executives, HR professionals, etc., are saying, well, we might hire them. There's driver shortage, it's tough to find drivers. And while a cocaine positive or a methamphetamine positive test is one indicator, maybe marijuana is not at that level. So let's go to the next slide. So of those folks who said they would rehire, is there an amount of time that must pass after that positive marijuana drug test before you'll hire that person? And of those who gave an answer, the plurality said 5 years. Some said all the way up to 5 to 10 years, but many were in the 1 year, 6 month area. If you can get through the clearinghouse return to duty process, then you're welcome back. The next slide. We asked carriers if they've noticed an increase in positive tests in the past 5 years. The majority, not surprisingly, said yes, they had noticed this. So that just speaks and shows further evidence that recreational marijuana is probably pushing these numbers a little higher, pushing the positive tests a little higher, and taking more folks out of the industry. So next slide. We asked carriers, are they concerned about a whole host of different things? And I'll just go through a couple of these. This one is, are you concerned drivers will be more likely to drive while impaired as a result of legalization? As you see here, a quarter were not concerned, but then the majority had some concerns, with extremely concerned being 40%. So certainly the idea of marijuana being available, legally available to a driver, even though the driver is not allowed to continue to operate a commercial vehicle and use marijuana, certainly there's concern there that this will impact a business. Next slide. Now this one's even more interesting. Are you concerned that a driver is more likely to test positive in a post-crash screening? So it's not necessarily testing positive in a random drug scenario, but this is even worse for the motor carrier, where you have a crash and then it requires a screening, and then the driver tests positive for marijuana, and that may be influenced by how readily available marijuana is. That becomes a huge concern from a liability standpoint, certainly, because this is the type of thing a plaintiff's lawyer is going to bring up. From their perspective, this is what they're looking for, and they can say, all right, this person was using drugs, even though they were not necessarily using drugs within 2 weeks of an accident, for instance. It could be well outside of operating hours and still be a positive test. So here you see extreme concern, 58%. Next slide. Is there concern that insurance rates, are you concerned that insurance rates will increase if you're domiciled in a state where it's legal? The majority had concerns, and almost half were extremely concerned. There were about a fifth were not concerned by this, and that could be because they aren't in a legal state. If you're domiciled in Georgia, for instance, you're probably not worried that marijuana is going to become legal anytime soon. That's where I'm based out of. So next slide. So next, going on to the driver survey results. So we asked drivers, while you're off duty in a state where marijuana is legal, are you allowed to use marijuana? The majority of drivers said, no, you're not. That's great news. It was about 3/4 of drivers said, no, you're a CDL holder, you're not allowed to use marijuana ever. But 19% of drivers were not sure if a CDL holder can use marijuana. This is of drivers off duty in a state where it's legal. And this kind of gets to the point of the problem. Drivers, there are some drivers out there who are unclear on these laws because they're kind of conflicting. It's like, all right, it's legal in my state, maybe it's okay for me to use, and then all of a sudden they get a random drug test, which is currently set at a pretty high threshold. The random drug test, 50% of your workforce, of your drivers, of your safety sensitive workforce, and then they're in the clearinghouse. 6% incorrectly said drivers can use marijuana off duty in states where it's legal. That's a small number, which is good that it's a small number. We expected some folks to fall into that category, maybe not that many. So next, driver impairment. Oh, sorry. If you'll go back one slide. Driver opinions on impairment. Impairment time. How long are you impaired after using recreational marijuana? And actually, no one knows the answer to this. Because marijuana potency varies so much, it's completely unregulated how much marijuana could be in a product that is sold for recreational use. But what drivers said, the plurality, the most common response, as it's put here, is after 10 hours or more. And it's a safe bet that after 10 hours, level of impairment has decreased. Some folks did say it was a much shorter time period, and some folks said well beyond 24 hours is needed. And that may be the case also. It depends where this goes and where the industry wants it to go, and whether or not that can be measured. Finally, drivers are on the road all the time, seeing what's going on, seeing the cars operating around them. And we asked them, do they believe, based on their experiences, that highway safety has been impacted by legalized marijuana? And the majority of drivers said no. Well, that said, 45% said yes. So I was a little surprised by this. I thought it would be far more, but still, it's 45% saying yes, safety has been impacted in states where recreational marijuana is legal. So let's move on to the next slide. So we then asked drivers and carriers, should a marijuana impairment test replace the current marijuana use test? And the reason for this question is, as I've gone through several times, marijuana stays in the system for a long time, well beyond the state of impairment. And would it be better if there were a test that measured whether or not you're impaired? And many drivers in their comments said stuff like, under FMCSA's rule, you are not allowed to drink alcohol 4 hours or less before going on duty. So 4.5 hours prior to going on duty, you are allowed to drink alcohol. And you can have alcohol in your blood according to the FMCSA regs, but it must be under 0.04, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it must be below a level, but you can still have alcohol in your body and operate legal. But marijuana, within 30 days, it's absolutely not. So we asked them, should an impairment test replace the marijuana use test? And I think this speaks to the frustration that both drivers and carriers are having with this topic. 65% said yes. There needs to be a change. There needs to be something here to replace the status quo. So that would be a majority for sure. And then 20% of drivers said no, we need to stick with the status quo, and 30% of carriers said status quo. So moving on to the next slide. So we conclude the report with the idea of two federal pathways that can be taken, because really the ball's in the federal government's court. Certainly, more and more states are going to make marijuana legal, and this issue isn't going to get better anytime soon. There really needs to be a push towards better testing, better ways to identify impairment. But the federal government has to take the lead at some point here. That it can't just be in conflict with all of the states. So there are two pathways. The first one being marijuana remains a federally prohibited Schedule I drug. As this continues, the trend with CDL holder marijuana positive tests is likely to continue, especially if there is a driver shortage. It's going to be continue to impact the industry. And the other thing that might happen is marijuana rules might evolve towards federal legalization, but that's very tricky also. I mentioned the Schedule I designation, and that's important. Without that Schedule I designation, there could be drivers who say, all right, I have a medical card and I need an exemption, and I found a doctor who says I can use marijuana and also drive. Well, that might be against your company's policies. That might be too much risk for you as a carrier to take, and it makes sense that it would be. But there are instances in case law where folks in Connecticut and Massachusetts have brought Americans with Disability Act lawsuits against not motor carriers, but several employers who aren't in safety sensitive industries, but folks have faced lawsuits from employees who said, I was denied employment because I tested positive for marijuana, but I'm using it to treat Crohn's disease, or I'm using it to treat PTSD. So without that Schedule I designation, a lot of issues kind of show up for the trucking industry. So what needs to happen before that sort of thing would happen at the federal level? Certainly, there need to be protections for carriers to have the choice to screen for drugs, even if it is for metabolites. A carrier should be able to choose whether or not they screen their drivers, candidates, etc. There absolutely has to be a national impairment test and standards as well. If you're going to legalize this, there needs to be a way to detect impairment. And then finally, developing deeper knowledge of safety impacts of marijuana. There needs to be more data collection. How many folks are actually out there driving while impaired? Therefore, what can we do to prevent that? Just like what has always been done with alcohol. But I don't think there's a good grasp of how many folks are driving while impaired, how many of the crashes that we have each year are related to marijuana, because they're just simply not being tested, because the test doesn't say, all right, it's a factor in this crash because the person tested positive, because it's not a test for impairment, it's a test for past use, and marijuana may or may not be a contributing factor. It's still a very fuzzy area without the impairment test. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to questions. And I should point out here, if you'd like to receive our research in the future, you can go to our website and subscribe to ATRI's latest research. And it may not be on the front page any longer, but this report, the full report, is there on the website. You can see it here. I think it's the second thing in latest news, but it has likely moved you can just use the search bar and search marijuana and you'll find that report and you can download it for free. And next slide. Questions outside of here, you can certainly send me an email. So with that, we can go to Q&A.
Thank you, Jeff. That's some amazing statistics that kind of caught me by surprise at some of the numbers there. We do have a question here from Jim Vaughn, and I kind of expected this question. Some of the test results are coming from long-term use of CBD products.
Yes.
Have you looked at this issue?
So we did, and we asked drivers if they were aware of someone they knew who had used it. And if you give me just a second, I don't have that. Who had been impacted, and I believe it wasn't a majority, but it was a good percentage who said they knew someone who was using CBD oil and had been had tested positive for marijuana. So what's going on with the CBD oil? I don't generally give advice, but let's say I had a CDL and I was driving, I certainly would not use CBD oil because the label may say one thing, but it's not regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. It's not a highly regulated industry. It's, let's call it an herbal supplement. I wouldn't put it into my body because it is quite possible, since it's coming from similar species, or it may actually be coming directly, it may actually have THC in it that is not removed, or they're just pulling it from the wrong strain of the plant. It is possible for you to test positive if it has THC in it, and at the end of the day, if you want to risk your career, you could use it, but I would tell any driver who asked me directly, I'd say no, because you don't know what's in it, regardless of what's on the label, regardless of the guarantees. There are just too many uncertainties. And I'm sure if you do your own cost benefit, maybe the benefits of it aren't aren't on par with the risks.
Just to jump in here, there was another comment by Jim, the person that asked the CBD question. And this is kind of an interesting thought. It says, if you have an impairment test and a driver is killed in a crash, all you have is a blood test to confirm impairment. And, that creates a difficult circumstance there too. If the driver is killed, depending upon what the impairment test turns out to be, you may have nothing more than a blood test.
Mm-hmm.
And I just found that to be an interesting comment. I don't know that there's any answers to a lot of these questions yet.
Yeah.
But, that's a tough one. Somebody is asking if they can get a link or a copy of this in their emails. And of course, the webinar has been recorded, and we'll make sure we send out a link so everybody can get access to this in the future. Mark, do you have any comments or questions that popped into your mind? You've been in this business a long time.
Absolutely. I could go on for another couple of hours probably, but we don't want to do that. One question I had, Jeff, you mentioned 30 days that you can expect the marijuana to stay in your system. Does that also apply to hair testing, or does it go a little longer than that?
Hair testing would go up to 90 days. And hair testing is a solution for the cocaine, the methamphetamine issue with urine testing and it leaving the body. It's going to stay in your hair for up to 90 days is what the literature says. So hair testing would bring both out to that longer time period. So
it extends.
Certainly extends detectability.
And
it's not recognized by FMCSA, so you couldn't obviously use it in place of the urinalysis. but you can use it, I believe, as part of, as just another test you do.
Well, I can assure you our friends in the plaintiff's attorney's world can use it against you in the court of law. So that's something to the other thing that really struck me, Steve and Jeff, was the 20% of these drivers that were confused, maybe is the best word to say, about the whole issue. And I think as an industry, the executives that are on this call certainly need to reach out and do some content. I know we've got some content in the system. If not, do some custom content to get your drivers to transfer that information to them, and not rely on the guy sitting next to them at the truck stop for advice on how to on CBD oils. So
Yeah,
there's a lot of confusion out there. These are major issues, and a learning platform that you can reach out to your drivers this afternoon. I think, Steve, there's actually content that's available, or even better than that, to do a custom content on the impacts, the reality of marijuana use, the impairment, the CBD oil issue, all of that. You've got to get that out to your fleet. 20%, if 20% of the drivers surveyed said, I don't have any idea, I don't know what you're talking about, and those are the ones that actually answered the survey, I would speculate that the number's a little bit north of 20% for the whole driver population.
Yeah, I suspect you're right, Mark. And we're right on the screen here. We've got a couple of pretty new pieces of content about marijuana and also CBD. And we've kind of taken the stance in those that kind of what's legal and allowable today. So the recommendation under marijuana is, under current circumstances, it should be avoided at all costs by drivers, because there's a huge risk if in a random test that they'll show positive, and it's just taking drivers out of our available pool. And our advice on our CBD, even though it's legal in all 50 states, because you can't verify what's in the CBD, it's best to just leave it alone and not use it at all. And I think that, Jeff, that's what you recommended. It's best at this point to leave it alone. So I don't know if we have any other questions out there. Feel free to type those into the chat box. But as Mark said, if you have some interest in gaining access to some of the training we offer, we're happy to speak with you about that. And if you'd like to learn more about what we can do, I think there's a little poll question that's popping up on the screen here that you can let us know, and we'll reach out and touch base with you. Any other questions? Any other comments from you, Mark?
I'd just like to thank Jeff for the work he's done on this,
kidding.
and in the American Transportation Research. This is a very difficult issue, and it's not going away. It's not going to solve itself, and our industry relies on professionals like you to help us get through this swamp. So thank you very much for all you've done for our industry, and hopefully we will get a little better control over it in the future.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, Jeff, real quick before you bail out, and I don't know if you can answer this or not, but we have a guest from Colorado, I'm guessing, and she says, any word on testing in Colorado? We've heard that they were testing a possible breath test, kind of like a breath alcohol test. Have you heard anything about that?
I am not familiar with that, but I know there are a number of approaches that are being looked at. There's breath test, mouth swab. There are folks who think you can scan the brain. Now, I don't know how you do this from the roadside, but they've shown you can tell if someone's impaired on marijuana through some kind of brain scan. That sounds unwieldy to me, but hey, whoever can make this work, it's a good business to be in if you can get something, if you can get some agreed upon, accepted impairment testing.
Right.
I know New Zealand had put into place briefly a law on I think it's nanograms. I'm not a chemist, but an amount of THC in the blood would mean you're impaired. Let's put it that way. And then they threw that law out because they said there's just not enough proof that this proves anything about whether you're impaired or not. So
yeah,
if hopefully we can get enough people working on this, enough chemistry experts certainly, to figure this out. Maybe there will be a solution, but I don't see one in the coming years. I see this kind of getting more difficult before it gets easier, unfortunately. But hopefully there will be more research put into this area. And one of the, I don't know if I'd call it ironic, but interesting things is with legalization in some states, it opens up the ability to research the impacts of marijuana on subjects. So
right.
In a way that could be a helpful thing
Yes,
on the research side.
been a little difficult to do research on something that's illegal. So,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So, listen, Jeff, thank you so much. I greatly appreciate you bringing your information to the program today. And to all of you out there, ATRI is an extremely valuable resource. And I would ask you all to seriously consider supporting that organization. I think it's important work that they do, and we would not be in the know about a lot of things like this if it wasn't for people like Jeff and that organization. So once again, Jeff, thank you very much for coming. Thanks to all of you out there in the audience for joining us today. And we hope that we can see you on a program sometime down the road. Jeff, thank you very much, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.